several fundamental principles. First, Americans have the right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Government Oversight and Reform Committee is to ensure that these rights and those responsibilities of government are upheld. It's absolutely essential in our system to have accountability. We have committees that have jurisdiction over creating different government programs. We have committees that appropriately fund programs. And our particular responsibility is overseeing how those programs work and operate and function in the best interest of the American people and how their funds are spent. It's also good to be here in Plymouth, and I want to thank, I believe it's a township, for their hosting us in this beautiful facility. It's good to bring a little bit of federal government out of Washington and into the local communities, and I thank Congressman Bentivolio for inviting us and participating today in this hearing. I might tell folks, and this is probably the first hearing that's been, congressional hearing that's been held in Plymouth. Maybe there have been others I don't know about, but first I know of. This is not town hall form. We do have a very formal schedule, and that is the order of our business and the conduct. Complete record of this hearing is made. It will also be transcribed, and it is for official purposes. So those who have been invited to testify this morning will do so. They'll do so also under oath, and we'll introduce that panel shortly. The order of business is I will give an opening statement. I'll yield to Mr. Bentivolio for his opening statement. And we'll also keep the record open. We don't have our full subcommittee membership with us today, but members will be entitled for a designated number of days to submit statements for the record. I might say, too, for the public and officials and others who are attending, if you would like to participate in contributing to the hearing, you are welcome to ask through your representative, in this case Mr. Bentivolio, that your statement be submitted for the record. It would have to be done through a member of Congress. So that is the order of business we'll conduct ourselves in. And again, I thank people for attending. Thank you for the invitation, Carrie, and good to be with you here. The first thing that I want to do is, again, talk about why we're here and what the subject is. And, today, I think it's important that we look at not just the laws that are passed in Washington, but laws creating agencies impact us in that the agencies produce regulations, and that's their authority under law. In addition to the laws that we pass, we're now seeing the proliferation of rules and regulations coming out of agencies at unprecedented pace. Those regulations do have very serious impact on the creation of jobs, the expansion of the economy, and also the ability for people to live and realize the American dream, because they all have an impact, a cost, and specifically we'll see in this hearing some consequences and what happens in, again, expanding jobs. According to the Congressional Research Service, between 2009 and 2012, the Obama administration finalized more than 13,000 regulations. Last year alone, more than 3,500 new regulations were added to the books. By the administration's own estimates, major regulations issued in 2012 added almost $20 billion in annual costs to the American economy. Annually, federal regulations cost the American economy a staggering $1.8 trillion. As the Competitive Enterprise Institute puts it, if it were a country, the U.S. regulations would account and be responsible for that particular activity being the 10th largest economy in the world. The growing regulatory state is particularly a concern for small business. According to the United States Chamber of Commerce, almost 45% of small businesses identify over-regulation and economic uncertainty as their most significant challenges. According to the National Federation of Independent Businesses, government regulations are the single most important problem facing small business. And oftentimes people think that big corporations are the primary employers in the United States. In fact, it's small business that is the biggest employer and also the biggest job creator. So there is a concern, and that concern is warranted about the proliferation of these regulations. Last year, federal agencies published proposed and final rules that, by the administration's own estimates, would cost the American economy $112 billion. In the Obama administration, federal regulators have finalized rules that in total cost the economy, again, almost $500 billion. So these are some of the facts that we want to make certain are part of the record. We're going to hear from several witnesses today. We have 4 witnesses, and I will introduce them shortly. I also want to pay attention and recognition to Mr. Louis K. Euler, who's president of the National Tax Limitation Committee. I met him just a few minutes ago. He's come from all the way from California to attend this hearing, and his organization, the National Tax Limitation Committee, focuses on some of the issues like we're discussing here today. So it's nice to see folks from Plymouth, from Michigan, all the way from California, who are concerned about the direction of regulations and the cost of doing business and making America go and grow. So very pleased to welcome him and all of you again. Thank Mr. Bentivolio, and I will yield now to the gentleman from Michigan for an opening statement.
Just for technology's sake, they need to record it.
Okay, just a second.
Okay, I'm going to...
Technical interruption here.
Around your neck and your
Okay. It's not picking us up. Okay.
Good to go.
There you go.
Good. Good morning.
Just a second here.
I want to start by thanking the chairman for holding this hearing in the wonderful 11th District of Michigan, and for the opportunity to hear directly from business leaders about how the federal government is impacting the business environment. And thank you to the witnesses who are here to speak with us today. We are speaking about federal regulations today because federal regulations have the potential to significantly impact businesses and communities. The impact of regulations is often good. In my lifetime, the need for appropriate regulation has been made apparent from damage to our homes, families, and environment from a handful of bad actors. Not far from here, industrial pollution led to multiple fires on the Cuyahoga River in Ohio. In the 1970s, the nation was shocked by the tragedy of ineffective toxic chemical disposal at Love Canal in New York. Importantly, as a nation, we acted. In the 1960s, we passed the Clean Air Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. In the 70s, we passed the Clean Water Act and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. When faced with serious concerns, we put in place many appropriate and effective regulations that protect our families, our workers, and our environment, because clean water healthy children, and safe work environments are important to all of us. But it is also important that we strike a balance. Affordable homes, steady employment, and the ability to provide for our families are important. Regulating for the sake of regulating only harms our families and our workers. As I walk around our community, I see for sale and for lease signs instead of help wanted signs. Unemployment in Michigan has been above the national average for more than a decade. According to the Heritage Institute, EPA regulations are expected to cost the nation more than 600,000 jobs by 2023. Michigan will lose more than 15,000 jobs in the manufacturing industry alone. The manufacturing industry faces some of the highest regulatory burdens in our nation. And the 11th Congressional District has the second highest number of manufacturing jobs. We can't afford these regulations. We can't afford to lose jobs because the EPA doesn't know when to quit. Last year, the EPA proposed 3 regulations that in total will cost the economy more than $50 billion. If we keep going like this, we will regulate America out of business. Currently, there are many proposed federal regulations that, if finalized, will threaten the survival of many Michigan small businesses, which will result in job losses. Today, we will hear from those business leaders who are on the front lines, drowning in the sea of new and potential regulations. I look forward to the perspectives of those with real experience and knowledge about the impact of federal action. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, thank the gentleman, and the next order of business will be, I'm going to introduce our witnesses. Before I do that, I want to state for the record that members may have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record without objection so ordered. Again, welcome our witnesses who've volunteered. We didn't have to subpoena any of you today, which is good. But thank you for being part of our hearing today. In just a minute, I'll swear you in, and you will be sworn before the committee. We ask you to try to, I don't know if anyone's testified before, but we ask you to try to limit your presentation and testimony to 5 minutes and an oral presentation to the subcommittee. If you have lengthy material or additional information you'd like to be made part of the record, we'll be glad to do that through request. So sort of the rules of the procedure. Today we have Mr. Chris Fisher, and he is President and CEO of the Associated Builders and Contractors of Michigan. Welcome. We have Ms. Janet Caboose. She is the President and CEO of Whitaker Greer Company. We have Mr. Lenahan, is President of the Resource Recovery Corporation of West Michigan. Our fourth and final witness is a constituent of Mr. Bentivolio's, and I'll defer to him to introduce that witness.
Thank you. It is my honor to welcome Mr. Richard Kligman here today in his capacity as president of Superb Custom Homes. Thank you for being here today, all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Bentivolio. Now, if our witnesses will rise, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this committee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Again, I welcome each of you. Good to have you participate. As I said, if you have a long statement, and we will ensure that through request that it is in its entirety, it will be part of the record. But we would like you to try to summarize in 5 minutes, and that'll give us a chance to go through everyone. We'll hold the questions until afterwards. Then Mr. Bentivolio and I will submit some questions for your response. So we'll start first with Mr. Fisher, and he's President and CEO of Associated Builders and Contractors of Michigan. Welcome, sir, and you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Chairman Micah. Welcome to Michigan, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. My name is Chris Fisher with ABC of Michigan. We are a statewide trade association working in partnership with chapters representing firms who perform work in the commercial and industrial construction sectors of our state. Today, I'd like to focus on a few labor issues by drawing a contrast between what states like Michigan have been doing on the state level by enacting common sense reforms, and contrast that a little bit with what we're seeing in the federal government, where we have seen a rather onerous and one-sided big labor-driven agenda that is clearly not working. I'll begin by taking, for example, in 2009, when President Obama issued Executive Order 13502 to encourage federal agencies to require what's called a Project Labor Agreement, or PLA, on federally funded construction projects. Very simply, a PLA is a special interest handout designed to only award construction contracts to unionized contractors and their unionized workforce. There's nothing wrong with unionized companies getting a contract, but there is wrong when you have a special interest monopoly that denies that open competition and gives everybody a fair shot. And so PLAs come at the expense of two important things that this committee and Congress should be very concerned about: equal opportunity and fiscal accountability. PLAs deny U.S. businesses and workers equal opportunity by prohibiting the 85.9% of the United States workforce that chooses not to be affiliated with a union from accessing work opportunities for public construction projects that are funded by their own tax dollars. PLAs also then discourage fiscal accountability because when you erode the competitive bid process like this, and therefore the ability for public procurement to reap the benefits of fair and open competition is diminished. The result, as studies have found, is that public construction costs escalate by as much as 10 to 20% on these projects that are subject to PLAs. Now, what we would suggest is that instead the federal government needs to follow the lead of Michigan and some 20 other states that have eliminated union-based favoritism in contracting by treating all workers and businesses, union and non-union alike, with the dignity that they deserve. This committee has jurisdiction over legislation introduced by Representative Andy Harris from Maryland, H.R. 436, the Government Neutrality and Contracting Act, which would prevent the federal government from further engaging in these unfair and costly procurement practices. Simply put, it's wrong to rip off taxpayers while denying citizens, because of their labor status, the opportunity that they deserve to work on public projects. PLAs are not the only example of federal regulations run amok. The out-of-control National Labor Relations Board, or NLRB, has continually pursued a one-sided agenda instead of doing what its core purpose is, which is maintaining a balanced approach on behalf of both labor and management. The latest issue of concern is the NLRB's proposed ambush election rule. This rule is aimed to dramatically shorten the amount of time between when a union files a representation petition and when an election takes place, to as few as 10 days. The harmful impact of this is that it therefore limits the ability of workers to gather information and facts as they weigh the important decision surrounding whether or not their company should be unionized or not. The National Labor Relations Act, our point, is that they shouldn't be discouraging workers to get the facts necessary to make an important decision. Contrast this with states such as Michigan, where we have instead passed pro-worker reforms that enable workers to have the information to gather the information they need to make these decisions. Michigan passed Right to Work recently, and indeed we support the ability of workers to gather the information they need to make a decision and not be forced to join a union as a condition of employment. Finally, OSHA is likewise a concern. Take, for example, OSHA stating that non-union workers are able to that union officials are able to do worksite inspections for companies that are potentially targeted. Having a community organizer on a job site raises questions about the actual intent of that union organizer, and for that matter, it raises questions about what is OSHA doing in this arena to begin with. It's not germane to its cause of workplace safety. Here in Michigan, however, we have agreements with OSHA and partnerships with OSHA where we work cooperatively to promote worker health and safety. And indeed, this is the way we should do things federally. So, Mr. Chair, these are just a few examples of some of the issues that we are seeing on the regulatory labor end of things. What we're doing in Michigan is working, and we encourage the federal government to do the same. We've gained construction jobs every year over the past 3 years in Michigan. Construction worker incomes have increased year after year after year, and we think that the states are laying down a pretty good framework for the federal government to follow, and we would encourage this committee and others to act. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions later on, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fisher, and let me recognize Janet Kibith. She is the president and CEO of Whitaker Greer Company. Welcome, and you're recognized. A little bit.
Cool. Thank you.
I think they go on by themselves. We're learning ourselves.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come today. My name is Janet Whitaker-Cabot. I work for a company called Whitaker Greer, and we've been manufacturing clay products in northeastern Ohio since 1916. The company currently is owned by my brother, my sister, and myself, and we are the fourth generation of my family to own and operate the company. I am here on behalf of my company and my industry. The many peaks and valleys of the brick industry is well demonstrated by the clay products industry here in Michigan, where in 1911 there were as many as 138 clay product manufacturing facilities. Currently there are 7 with only 1 brick plant. What has happened here has happened all over the country. Whitaker Greer is a small niche product manufacturer that produces fire brick for the inside of masonry fireplaces and paving brick. You have probably walked on our paving brick in places like Pennsylvania Avenue in DC, Greenfield Village here in Michigan, and Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Hollywood, Florida. Our mission is to modernize our facility in order to succeed for the next 100 years. We have just begun the second of several phases in this modernization process. Our industry is committed to doing the right thing for our employees, vendors, customers, and communities. However, as we continue to struggle to come out of the Great Recession, we need to be sure our limited resources are being used on the most important issues that will provide some benefit for every dollar spent. Today I'm going to talk about 2 upcoming regulations, the air toxic standard being developed by EPA, known as the BRIC Act, and the proposed revisions to the silica permissible exposure limit, or PEL, being considered by OSHA. Compliance with either of these regulations threaten the continued existence of many small companies in our industry. Compliance with both of these rules at the same time will devastate our already depleted industry. This leads to my constant question regarding the regulatory development process. Is anyone looking at the cumulative cost of these regulations on an industry? If these regulations would save lives of our workers or our neighbors, it would be worth it. However, in both cases, the regulatory authority has data that show the benefit of these regulations is minimal or non-existent for the brick industry. The BRIC Act, which will be proposed in August, was originally promulgated in 2003. Our industry complied in 2006 by installing 80 of the 100 controls now in existence at a cost of over $100 million in capital and operating costs. But in 2007, the courts vacated the rule. Now the EPA is using the performance of these new controls to establish even lower limits for the upcoming rule. For many brick companies, this would require them to replace the controls installed to comply with the first MACT. We have used EPA's own air dispersion models and actual stack parameters to clearly demonstrate that even under the worst conditions, 99% of our emissions would be less than 40% of what EPA considers safe, and most would be less than 10%. We have spoken with EPA about this data, but have received no feedback as of yet. We hope EPA is considering this health-based approach. However, the EPA has indicated the potential that even if they consider the health-based approach, control of the remaining 1% of emissions could still cost our industry essentially the same as controlling the other 99%. EPA's estimates put the potential cost of this regulation at more than $188 million per year. That represents 22% of our gross industry revenue in 2012. Whitaker Greer's share of that cost is estimated to be $5 million, which is 50% of our current net worth. In September of last year, OSHA proposed revisions to the current PEL for silica. This reduction was proposed as a one-size-fits-all type of regulation that is typical for OSHA. OSHA estimates costs for this rule to average $38,000 per year, annualized over a 10-year period for a brick plant. This is 15 to 18 times greater than OSHA's estimate for the average cost in general industry. Industry experts estimate that OSHA is underestimating this cost by as much as 20 to 50 times. OSHA has been provided a significant set of studies conducted over the last 75 or more years, demonstrating that the silica found in the brick industry has a different effect on the body compared to silica in other industries. OSHA acknowledges separately the reduced incident rate of our industry and the much higher costs. However, they do not put those two pieces of data together to consider our industry separately. For each brick plant to comply will require an investment of $906,000 in the first year. This is the amount of cash that I need for compliance, therefore the amount that's important to me as opposed to the annualized amount. Practically speaking, compliance with both these regulations would require me to obtain a loan for $6 million to add equipment that would not reduce our costs, improve our product, increase our sales, or provide any health benefits for our employees or our neighbors. It would be impossible for us to obtain a loan of this size that would not provide us with any benefits at all in the current banking environment. The cost of compliance with both regulations at the same time would put us out of business, and we are probably not the only brick company in this situation. In both cases, EPA and OSHA have the flexibilities contained within their directive acts to meet their obligations without destroying our industry. We just don't know how to make them use those flexibilities. Take the time to do it right, not just do it quickly, and avoid a one-size-fits-all approach that will destroy an industry. I would like to think that after 100 years of providing good employment, paying taxes, and being a responsible corporate entity, that someone in our government could look at the cumulative effect of regulatory compliance and help us protect our workers, our neighbors, and our environment, but still allow us to exist. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and we'll now go to Mr. Michael Linehan. He is the president of Resource Recovery Corporation of West Michigan. Welcome, sir, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Micah and Representative Bentivolio, for inviting me here today. My name is Michael Linehan, and I am testifying on behalf of the American Foundry Society. The American Foundry Society is the predominant trade association of the metal casting industry in North America. Foundries manufacture engineered parts called castings, which are made by pouring molten metal into a mold. Most of the time, these molds are made out of sand. Examples of metal castings that you may be familiar with are engine blocks, manhole covers, artificial knee joints, and the Liberty Bell. The U.S. foundry industry employs approximately 250,000 people, but 80% of those foundries employ 100 people or less. We are comprised primarily of small businesses. Many of the companies that supply foundries are also small businesses, and I run one of those businesses. My testimony today really boils down to one thing and one thing only. Anything that takes time away from efficiency of managing a small business can be crippling. Small businesses simply do not have the resources to dedicate to tasks that are non-productive. In order for any business to thrive, there must be time for management of a business to do three things. 1, focus on enhancing what they do well. 2, improve productivity. 3, expand offerings and grow the business. When management has time to look ahead and focus on improvement, they typically increase productivity and expand. This often results in the hiring of more employees. When management does not have time to focus on these things, they mark time and wait for the next crisis. For many businesses, the next crisis is addressing the latest regulation. Regulations, and more specifically, regulatory changes or new regulations, consume massive quantities of managerial time and resources. From my viewpoint, there are 5 major problems I see with federal regulations. 1, there are far too many new regulations. 2, many new regulations or modifications to regulations appear to be created or modified with minimal or no thought as to how they'll impact a business. 3, many regulations are improperly conceived or misapplied and provide little to no measurable benefit. 4, new regulations have a cost that is often ignored or dramatically understated by those writing the new regulations. 5, new regulations create uncertainty which limits a business and their ability to plan. I have 3 brief examples that I'd like to reference as part of my testimony today as to how regulations impact small business and job creation. The first example highlights OSHA's new crystalline silica standard. I'm submitting a copy of the foundry industry testimony given at the March 28, 2014 hearing with OSHA and the U.S. Department of Labor. In the interest of time, I'd like to briefly explain in layman's terms the basics of this new rule. This new rule will reduce the permissible exposure limit for silica from 100 micrograms per cubic meter to 50 micrograms per cubic meter. What does 50 micrograms per cubic meter look like? Take a packet of artificial sweetener and distribute it across a football field at the height of 13 feet. That's what that looks like. As mentioned, foundries utilize sand, primarily made of silica, to make the molds which define the shape of the castings they produce. A foundry of this football field area size could be utilizing upwards of 10,000 tons of sand in annual production. As a reference point, that would take 400 semi-dump trucks lined up bumper to bumper for approximately 4 miles. OSHA's new silica rule would require all foundries not meeting the 50 microgram standard to put in engineered controls, basically massive high-quality filtration equipment within the facility to get the foundry into compliance. On the surface, this may seem like an acceptable idea until you dig a little deeper. First, the vast majority of experts on the subject believe foundries will fail to meet the standard, even if they use the best technology money can buy. Second, to provide some perspective, the level of cleanliness required to meet the new standard is more stringent than what the National Aviation and Space Administration, NASA, requires for silica in one of their laboratory clean rooms. Lastly, the new rule does not allow employers to provide workers with personal protective devices until after it proves the installed engineering controls cannot meet the standard. In other words, this regulation says, spend the money on extremely expensive engineering controls, whether they work or not, and only after you prove it does not work can you distribute personal protective equipment to your employees. The logic behind this approach is flawed at the most basic levels. How many successful strategic initiatives involve choosing the most expensive and most likely option to fail first? This would be like forcing a public school district to purchase jet airplanes to transport school children because statistics show it's safer mode of transportation than buses. Practical application of this idea would be more costly and not as safe. Eventually they'd go back to buses, but only after they broke the bank on buying airplanes. This may sound like a ridiculous comparison. However, if you'll see in the executive summary of the attached testimony that this is not the most effective way to protect workers. You'll also see that OSHA has omitted some costs and grossly underestimated the overall cost to implement this new rule, $44 million per year versus $2.2 billion. I think I'm running out of time here, but I will make quick mention of NSPS Subpart UUU, which is a rule that was never intended to be applied to the foundry industry. This rule, we know it was not meant to be applied to the foundry industry because we got to the author at EPA and he said it was never meant to be applied. So we spent time chasing our tails on a rule that was never meant to be applied to us, spent money with attorneys, spent money working together as an industry, and it's for something that'll never be gain any environmental benefit nor never meant to be applied to us. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for your testimony, and we'll now turn to Mr. Kligman, and he is the president of Superb Custom Homes. Welcome, and you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Micah and Congressman Bentivolio. On behalf of more than 140,000 members of the National Association of Home Builders, my name is Richard Kligman, and I'm a builder from Plymouth, Michigan, and serve as president of Superb Custom Homes. Housing serves as a great example of an industry that would benefit from smarter and more sensible regulation. According to a study completed by the NHB, government regulations account for 25% of the price of a single-family home. NHB economists recently performed an analysis looking at the number of households in Michigan that would no longer qualify for a mortgage due to compliance with the latest building codes. New code requirements would increase the incremental construction cost for a typical residence by $2,532. The base price of a typical new one-story home in Michigan is $121,040. $2,532 may not seem like a lot in the big picture, but the study indicates that 31,106 Michigan households would be priced out and denied the opportunity of home ownership. I believe this example illustrates just how impactful overregulation can be, as many of the regulations being discussed will be significantly more costly to implement than $2,500. The bottom line is unnecessary regulatory costs hurt real people right here in Michigan. I'd like to highlight a few of those regulations that are of concern. Waters of the United States proposed rule. The Environmental Protection Agency and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers recently proposed a rule redefining the scopes of waters protected under the Clean Water Act. The proposed rule falls well short of providing the clarity and certainty our industry seeks. This rule will increase federal regulatory power over private property and will lead to increased litigation, permit requirements, and lengthy delays for any business trying to comply. These changes will not improve water quality, as much of the rule improperly encompasses water features that are already regulated at the state level. The proposed rule establishes broader definitions of existing regulatory categories, such as tributaries, and regulates new areas that are not jurisdictional under current regulations. For any small business trying to comply with the law, the last thing it needs is a set of new, vague, and convoluted definitions that only provide another layer of uncertainty. OSHA crystalline silica rulemaking.
OSHA's proposed rule to control crystalline silica is the most far-reaching regulatory initiative ever proposed for the construction industry. Crystalline silica is a basic component of soil, sand, and granite and is found in numerous building materials. OSHA is proposing an 80% reduction in the permissible exposure limit, PEL, for respirable silica dust. OSHA has not explained how a drastically lower PEL will effectively reduce the number of silica-related illnesses and deaths. NHB believes OSHA should withdraw the proposed silica regulation until it can demonstrate that the proposal is technologically justified, economically feasible, and that it can be applied and understood in the real world of residential construction. OSHA's proposal prescribes control methods that will ultimately cost the industry $3 billion annually. Federal involvement in local building energy codes. Building energy codes such as the International Energy Conservation, IECC, are used across the country to establish minimum standards for building energy efficiency. The codes are developed by private entities, but then adopted by state and local governments. The Department of Energy participates in this process. While they do not develop the codes themselves, they are authorized to provide technical assistance. NHB has serious concerns that this has been broadly interpreted to allow DOE to advocate for or against certain proposals. Home buyers are willing to pay more for lower utility costs, but according to our data, buyers need a 14% return on investment, which corresponds to a 7-year payback. The 2012 version of the IECC has such significant cost increases, it would take the average family 13.3 years just to break even on required mandates. For half of the state of Michigan, the payback period is actually 16.1 years. Some companies and advocacy groups are now pushing Michigan to adopt this onerous and expensive code because it benefits their business, treating certain products favorably. The Home Builders Association of Michigan is trying to find a reasonable solution. OSHA's fall protection standard. OSHA changed its residential construction fall protection regulation. OSHA rescinded its interim fall protection guidelines, which set out a temporary policy that allowed employers engaged in certain residential construction activities to use alternative procedures instead of conventional fall protection, such as guardrail systems, safety net systems, and personal fall arrest systems, for any work that is conducted 6 feet or more above lower levels. OSHA has not provided specific guidance regarding how it will interpret the standard or how builders are expected to comply in determining when the use of conventional fall protection is considered infeasible or its use creates a greater hazard. Builders have little assurance that their actions will meet OSHA's requirements and could be saddled with costly fines or citations, even though they were making good faith efforts to comply. OSHA's fall protection regulation should be reviewed under Executive Order 13563, improving regulation and regulatory review, to help make it move more effective and less burdensome for small businesses, exactly as envisioned by the President. In conclusion, I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts of my trade association, the National Association of Home Builders, on federal regulations impacting small businesses and job creation in Michigan. NHB is not against appropriate balanced regulation. Our members understand that regulation is needed, for example, to protect the nation's water supply and to limit a child's exposure to lead paint. Regulations are workable and sensible, where the rules are easily understood and applied, could be the type generally supported by our industry. Unfortunately, our industry is participating in several rulemaking processes, some of which I've highlighted, where agencies avoid well-established policies of the Administration Procedures Act and neglect the safeguards of the Regulatory Flexibility Act, all in the interest of promulgating rules for self-serving political gain. Thank you.
Well, I thank you. We won't run these. We're not going to run these, okay. I thank you, and I thank all of our witnesses. Interesting testimony. It was interesting. Start with Mr. Fisher, and he talked about Executive Order 13,502. And then we just ended up with Mr. Kligman. He was talking about Executive Order 13,563, 61 executive orders in between we didn't even get to hear about. But interesting testimony today, and some tough consequences proposed by some of these regulations. What I thought I'd do is I'm going to go through some of the testimony that was provided by each of you, a few questions. First, Mr. Fisher, the project labor agreement provision that you talked about, you said that Michigan had eliminated that. When did Michigan eliminate that?
Michigan, Mr. Chair, eliminated the ability to have a government-mandated PLA in 2011 with the Fair and Open Competition Act And what it simply states is that all workers, union and non-union alike, that you can't be discriminated against based on your decision to affiliate or not affiliate with a labor union. And it meant that all workers have the opportunity to access work opportunities on public construction projects. Before, you would have a special interest-driven mandate that would state that only a contractor that is signatory to a PLA, which is a form of a collective bargaining agreement, would be able to perform that work.
Is that only on state projects?
And so state, local.
Because you're still subject to the federal edict.
But unfortunately, we can't get out from under the federal edict, and that's the problem.
Right.
Is this federal
So
regulation?
one solution might be where a state does allow by state law the elimination of the project labor agreement requirement, that they be allowed to proceed without implementation of the federal. Would that be a possible solution?
That would be a possible solution. However, not, for example, if here we're close to, in Wayne County, to our county to the north of Macomb County, where there's Selfridge Air Force Base, for example. If there is a federal contract there that's completely under this jurisdiction of the federal government, or on an interstate highway that's under the jurisdiction of the federal government could still discriminate against workers and businesses in a local area based on labor affiliation. So we also think that the federal government should, in fact, enact a fair and open competition law to again protect taxpayers and workers, so that everybody could have that equal opportunity to pursue work in their communities.
You said the disparity could be 10 to 20%. Do you have any anecdotal information as to the effect of Michigan's
I do,
provision?
in fact. I think one great example was in the shadow of the state capital of Michigan in Lansing. A new city market was built subject to a PLA. It wasn't necessarily an expensive city market project. I think from start to finish it was about $3 million. It was let out to bid under a project labor agreement, and the result was that the project came in entirely out of budget, to the tune of, I believe, 25% over budget, and the city market wasn't able to be built until they rebid the entire project, opened up the bidding process, allowed everybody to participate, and then once you had the benefits of fair and open competition, and only then was the project able to come into, only then was it able to be on budget and finally get completed.
Okay. Aside from labor issue that you mentioned, you talked a bit about OSHA, and we've heard some others refer to OSHA and their overreach. Well, how can we ensure protection of workers without some of the federal interference through OSHA? You said that you have fairly good, it sounded like a fairly good relationship, and cited some of it as a model. How does that work? Are you just getting volunteer cooperation with OSHA, or is this something that can be a template for others to adopt? I've never heard of this before. Maybe you can explain it better.
Yes, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. Michigan, under OSHA, is what's called a delegated state. And OSHA does have a provision that allows a state to handle the health and safety functions of OSHA, to administer it under the belief that that government, which is closest to home, can govern best, that federally we don't need to necessarily be as hands-on if a state's able to, as long as they comport to all of OSHA requirements. And Michigan is one of the states that are able to do that.
So is the state enforcing the OSHA requirements, or are we?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And so what we have been able to do by having a partnership that's closer to home, closer to the Michigan-based construction industry, is form alliances. We are right now in the process of forming an ABC and OSHA alliance, and it's geared towards that key core role of OSHA, which is to promote worker health and safety, and not to and use a fact-based approach to methods that actually work. I think Mr.
Is this
Klingman,
done just by an agreement with the state and OSHA?
yes, yes,
Okay,
sir.
and I'm not that aware, everyone thinks members of Congress know all the programs, but this delegation authority is under law. Is it just to certain designated states by law, or can any state?
A state applies to federal OSHA and is able to do so. And
Okay.
Michigan,
Do you
I
know how
think,
many
did it back in the
states
70s.
participate on this basis?
I'd be happy to get that to you. I don't
Okay,
know right now.
I think that'd be interesting. Maybe the staff, we could add that in the record. But interesting concept. I don't see why it couldn't be further applied. And if Michigan can do it, certainly it could be a model for other states. I don't know how many others do that. In fact, devolving to the state some of this responsibility. A lot of what we do at the federal level is duplicative, not only in enforcement and regulation, but a whole host of areas, permitting, where we could be much more efficient. But thank you for bringing that to light and to the committee. We can look at that too and consider maybe expanding some of those provisions in future law. Okay, Ms. Cabeth, you produce those bricks that we walk on,
I do.
and
Not alone, though, but yes, we do.
that's interesting. And you talked about, again, some of the regulations. The cost to you would be $6 million with no apparent benefit. And what would happen if they force you to this?
Well, we'd have to close.
How many people do you employ?
We employ 80 people.
80 people. And you've been in business, it sounds like, a long time?
Yeah, since 1916. We're getting ready for our 100th anniversary.
That's
and
great.
Most brick companies are like us. It's not an industry that most people want to join because the capital costs are very great. The return is really not wonderful. Most of the companies are long-time family-owned businesses like ours.
Is there a lot of competition in the industry?
There is, however, that's why we specialize in the niche markets. That's the only reason we're even still here. We don't have the resources to compete with the big companies, so we stick with the paving brick, the fire brick for fireplaces, a place where we've been able to thrive. We do
And
a
if-
lot
if
of
you-
custom work.
Now, will that just narrow the competition by you going out of business, or is there foreign competition? Are there other sources?
There is no foreign competition, really. Brick is too heavy to import. The cost would be much too high for the freight. If we would be gone, it would reduce the choices for a lot of places. We're a very high-end, customized product, and we supply a lot of universities and colleges, so they would just have to find someone potentially who could do what we do, which is there aren't many left.
And the silica rule you talked about is the same one
Yes.
that everyone's talking about. There's nothing different. It's just the difference in the impact on each of you, and particularly devastating, it sounds, to your operations.
Well, and it's not just for the cost, but I've been with Whitaker Greer 35 years, and we've never had one person be ill from silica. I mean, that's part of our industry statement, is that we have studies for over 75 years that our employees just don't get silicosis. So it's ridiculous to have a rule that is so expensive that isn't going to help anybody.
Have you employed other means of protection of the workers? I mean,
We do. We have a number of things we do to reduce the dust overall in our facilities. And most facilities are very good at that. But to get to the level that OSHA is requesting is, to be honest, almost impossible, even with the engineering controls and everything else they want you to do. So,
Mr. Lenahan, was it you that testified about the amount that's allowed in a space laboratory, I guess it was?
Yes, actually, the standard is cleaner than a NASA clean room, which is a reference point. I think we all think of a NASA clean room and how clean that environment would be, and to have an industrial plant that handles tens of thousands of tons of material.
These rules come out and you have an opportunity to be heard on them. Do you feel that's adequate? Are they listening? Has there been opportunity, you think, to be heard?
I can answer that if nobody wants to step in. The second rule that I mentioned there was NSPS subpart UUU, which was an air rule. It was never meant to be applied to the foundry industry. We were not given an opportunity to provide information on the rule because we were...
Even though now you were impacted, were you noticed?
No.
You were not?
No.
Okay.
And that was one of the dilemmas. We wound up going back to EPA and we said, this was never meant to apply to us. And we were never had an opportunity during the comment period. We were never identified. And then when we got to the author of the rule, he said, no, you guys never should have been included in this rule. This was for industrial sand production, not for foundries.
And you're not currently under that mandate, or are you?
We are. It's actually one of those things.
Even though they said that you weren't noticed and it wasn't intended to apply, they've made no exception?
That's correct. The right hand a lot of times does not know what the left hand is doing. And
sounds typical in Washington.
And the enforcement arm of EPA, I want to be delicate in how I say this, but I don't think they're really concerned about that sometimes. We have an ability or a capability to enforce on this, whether it was meant to apply to you or not, and doggone it, we might just do that.
Now, had you written your members of Congress on this issue? You have?
Yes.
And the senators too?
Yes. And I go typically to Washington, D.C. at least once a year as part of a contingent from the metal casting industry. And this was a Hill issue last year at our government affairs conference.
And how does that affect you in competition or price or whatever? What's the impact?
Unlike my colleague to the right, we are impacted heavily by offshore competition. Metal casting facilities, since I entered the industry in 1987, there were 5,000 domestic foundries, and now there's about 1,900. And the reason for most of that is because regulations have pushed the foundries outside of the U.S.
And of course, all of them are complying with these high standards when they manufacture or produce foundry activities outside the United States. So that product's coming in very well manufactured and adhered to with the highest standards.
Yeah, we don't see that. And I'll give you one real quick example. A friend of mine was grilling in his backyard and dropped a cast iron piece of his grill, and it broke on the ground, and he knew that the grill parts came from China. He's a metallurgist, and he knew immediately what the problem was. He took the grill sample into the spectrometer at the foundry, shot it, and found there were 40 times the amount of arsenic in that cast iron grill than there were in the domestic castings we were making onshore. So we see things like cast iron skillets that are made offshore as compared to lodge manufacturing. And
so we have no control over those products that are coming in, and what's the biggest competition? Is it China?
China is probably still the largest competition. Probably what concerns me more than anything on that is that we make a lot of military parts, and we can't be dependent upon a country that may or may not be friendly at the moment to manufacture some of those parts. One of my customers made all the engine blocks for the landing craft that landed on the beaches at Normandy. If we didn't have those guys back during World War II, we might all be speaking German right now.
So 1,900 left out of over 5,000.
That's just in
probably the employment would be pretty significant. Maybe lost 50,000 jobs.
I would say closer to 350,000 jobs.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So very significant impact. Seems like there should be some way that we could require certification of some of those products that they were produced under the same standards. We're just talking now about certain and limited standards. If you got into some of the labor requirements and other regulatory regimes that we impose, probably couldn't import much of anything from those countries, would you say?
I think the biggest thing that our folks tell us is we want predictability and what we can expect down the line. We don't have any problem competing on a level playing field.
But it's not level.
It's not level. When currency is undervalued by 40%, and they're pegging their currency to our currency, we know it's not level. When we see castings come to the United States that are cheaper than what the raw materials cost, we know it's not level. We know there's supplementing going on there.
So you've gone from 5,000 to 1,900 foundries. Are we continuing to see the decline, or is this, you think the worst is over?
There's a little bit of stabilization, and what I think one thing to remember is the guys that are running these businesses now, they are the cream of the crop. They're bright, smart, solid business people. They've had to be to survive. The next round of attrition will come with the new silica rule. There will be people that will pack up their tents. They're small businesses. They're going to say, I can spend my money to fight something that's not going to work, or I can pack up my tent and protect my family. And I think we'll lose a bunch of businesses that way.
Well, you point out the difficulty of surviving. I mean, we're here close to Detroit, and we've seen how competition in manufacturing has driven a lot of business overseas, almost caused the collapse of some of our business in particularly the automotive industry over the years. But there are survivors, 1,900 in your business, and very pleased to drive by the Ford operations on my way in and seeing that they're also surviving. But it's very tough, especially when you have the rules and regs stacked against you.
If I could make one other brief comment. People assume that our industry is a dirty industry, heavy industry, and we're not. Our plant runs on renewable energy to actually clean the foundry sands, to repurpose them. And foundries that we work with today, what's leaving their back door is being recycled at a rate of over 90%. So anything that they're discarding is going out at 90-95%. The best households in the United States with regard to recycling are 20-25%. So I think that that's something also to remember. These are jobs that are important. They're actually green jobs. A lot of the products that we're making are from recycled materials also. That washing machine you put on your front lawn to discard, that's being remelted and repurposed into a casting.
Very good. Mr. Klingman, you talked about the new avenue the administration's taking to change the definition of federal involvement in water and definition of wetlands and its impact. It's kind of interesting because I chaired the Transportation Committee and served as the Republican leader for a number of years. And always trying to keep this at bay. People don't understand the significance of unraveling the current definition, which only gives the federal government authority over navigable bodies of water. It would unravel all kinds of rulings, interpretation, and dramatically expand the involvement of the federal government. Probably put a lot of your folks out of business. What are you all doing to weigh in on this with the administration? The route they're taking now is the regulatory route, and they haven't been able to do anything in Congress. What actions are you taking? I know you're testifying today.
Yes, sir. And I can have our staff provide you with.
Have you written in on the proposed rule? And
I'm not, I don't have specific knowledge on that. I do have Forrest Wall, who's our legislative affairs representative, if you're interested in swearing.
I'd like to know, and I'd like to know if you have submitted either to the secretary and to your representatives. Problem you have is most people there's so many new people in Congress too, they don't understand the implications of this change. They've gone down the avenue of trying to change this legislatively and failed. Now they're coming in the back door through regulation. But the consequences are pretty dramatic. You get the federal government into this area. It's not just the question of them having a new regulatory regime and expansion of it, but you're changing years and years of law, litigations, rulings, which would all unravel, and you would put all kinds of real estate at risk in the future. So sure. Appreciate your being with us, but I think it's important that you and every state organization and even individuals weigh in on this, because you're going to get slammed pretty hard.
Absolutely.
If this goes into effect. I think we have now, Carrie, probably 168 bills over just sitting in the Senate. They won't move any of them, and some of them, when they pass these regulations, the only way to undo them, well, there's two ways. One is through the Congress passing a law. Well, we can pass all we want in the House, and they sit in the Senate, and nothing happens. The second is through court, and they very cleverly, I don't know if you watched this, they packed the Federal District Court of Appeals in Washington. Part of the reason that we had this brouhaha in the Senate about going to 51 votes, it's rather than the 60 votes for approval of some of the appointments, was directed at packing the District Court of Appeals. It had a 4-4 sort of balanced approach of judges, and the Obama administration, the president added 3 new judges there to pack the court. So if you can't pass a law to overturn the regulation, what your recourse as an organization, individual, even folks in Congress could go to court. Well, most regulations are promulgated from the federal level in Washington, and your venue of recourse is the Federal District Court of Appeals. So once you pack that, which they've done, they have succeeded in negating the 60-vote rule. They've appointed the 3 judges. Now you have no other recourse because they've cut off your judicial recourse. So reaching a pretty serious situation in trying to stem the tide of some of these rules. This one is particularly ominous for the future of real estate, building, a whole host of areas that could be very dramatically impacted. So I just encourage you, and if you do have something you could provide to the committee and what you've done, I'd like to see a copy of that, because we can also use that, and hopefully you're contacting your senators too.
And sir, if I may, on your point, on a practical basis as well, if you had a ditch, for example, that filled up with spring rains here in Michigan for a month or 2 months a year, that could be categorized as a tributary.
Well, I've heard everything, a puddle in the backyard, pools.
Right. And then the permitting involved and the time and exposure, it's not manageable.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it's the responsibility of Congress to try to change the law, but the votes aren't there right now. Again, we don't have a recourse through the courts. You talked about impact of $2,500 per home, and actually pricing 3,100 people in Michigan out of that. Can you elaborate a little bit more on?
Well, we can provide the study for your review, but as costs are impacted, in particular, well, nationwide, but particularly here in Michigan, where we had such a prolonged downturn in the economy, and it was devastating to the housing industry as well. The consumers are still very sensitive to cost. We're, as a small volume builder, I still feel tremendous downward pressure on pricing from the consumers, and as we have costs going up, the question is who's willing to absorb them. And if the consumer is not, then it either prices them out of the home, or as a business person, I have to make a choice of saying, okay, well, I'm going to absorb that cost, but if I don't have margins and my risk goes up, I can hire fewer people, create less job opportunities. So there's a direct correlation with cost and affordability, opportunities for people, and job creation.
But if you could provide us a little bit more detail for
Certainly.
the record on the basis of your estimates there. Then finally, I think you talked about the OSHA Fall Protection Rule 13563. Now, is that gone into effect?
The standard is now being in effect, yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. And that's anything over 6 foot?
6 foot from the lower level. And where it becomes impractical, I can give you just a couple quick examples, but if you had a low-pitch garage roof, your personal fall protection system requires you to tie off over your head. You could be standing at the edge of the roof and not have anything over your head with a low-pitch roof, so the code would require that you build a guardrail around the perimeter, and the cost and time involved to do that would be greater and more expensive than the tear-off for the roof. So again, the consumer's negatively impacted with that.
Well-intended idea, but from a practical
But on a practical
implementation,
nature. Yes, sir.
it's costly, it's not that effective, and
Yes.
kind of...
And trusses as well, you need a tie-off point. OSHA is suggesting that you assemble all the trusses on the ground and get a large crane to carry it up, and that's not typical in residential construction. I have a 40-foot wide lot I'm building a house on right now. I don't have physical room to assemble trusses on the ground, and even if I could get the crane and the client was willing to pay for that extra fee. So there are times where it's just not practical.
All right. We appreciate your testimony. All of you will get back. I want to yield now to Mr. Bentivolio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kligman, I want to clarify. Let's see, if you order trusses, I'm picturing this. I used to be in the home building business. So you have trusses, the crew will lift them up, or you'll have a crane lift one at a time. You'll set them in place. You'll put stringers to hold them in place and straighten them, and horizontal, correct?
Correct.
24 inches on center, or 18 inches on center, something like that. So right now, though, you're telling me, if I understand this correctly, that you have to lift up all those trusses?
To comply, they're requiring a tie-off point, and you don't have that to start, so they're saying assemble it down and bring it all up in one.
Okay, well, you get pre-made trusses, right?
Correct, and there's conventional frame as well, but on a pre-made example, correct.
Okay, so the pre-made trusses are already assembled. Do you put them up one at a time at the same time? I mean,
correct, but to even start and to be working up there, you're not able to meet the requirements at that point. So it's kind of a chicken and egg type of scenario. So with strict conformance, there's even despite trying to make best efforts, there's risk that you're not conforming, and some of their solutions or proposed solutions aren't practical for our industry and are very cost prohibitive. So
what would you do in conventional framing, where you put the ridge board up and then you?
Yeah, you really, again, it comes back to a challenge of compliance at inception, a commencement. So, and it becomes very difficult to comply in certain, circumstances. And again, the association and my company as well, we're all in favor of safety, and it's important, and our trades feel the same. However, we're trying to be practical in that approach as well.
Mr. Linehan, correct?
Yes.
Now, you said there were 5,000 foundries in the United States, and we have quite a few small foundries here in Michigan, especially in the 11th Congressional District. I know on Haggerty Road, There's a couple companies that have a small foundry for making prototypes, correct?
I'm not familiar with that particular operation, and the 5,000 number was what there were domestically in 1987. Now there's about 1,900.
And what concerns me is, a personal experience in a military vehicle, M270 rocket launcher, transmission was manufactured in a foreign country, and they delivered them, the transmissions to be installed in these vehicles. And then after, I think it was close to, or less than 25 miles in travel time, transmission failed, and we knew it was going to fail before they would replace it. And they said it was made because it was made from cheap steel. What's the difference between, I don't understand, what's cheap steel versus, American-made, Michigan-type steel?
If you picture any kind of molten metal is made to a spec, almost like a cake mix. So there are certain elements in the metal that add strength. I've seen other examples where brake rotors, for example, if brake rotors, on your car that keeps your car from stopping, where those are not made to a certain specification. If they're made from the wrong flavor, for example, of iron or steel, whatever in that case, but in brake rotors case, iron, the brake, due to the coefficient of friction, will not stop. And we've seen brake rotors that have come over that have been counterfeited with a company name in Wisconsin that would not actually stop a vehicle. So we see problems like that as well. That's not something that's been seen just once.
And those foundries, those small foundries that make prototypes and some of our parts, actually are encased, that heating thing is encased with a fire brick that your companies make. Is that correct?
We used to, yes.
So it's, and I'm trying to look at this from a national defense point of view, because this used to be the arsenal of democracy. Welcome to Michigan. This used to be, and really concerns me. We've lost a lot of machinists in the last 10 years because of the recession. No longer, we're not training people for these very important jobs, because once you make a casting and the sand comes out and you reuse that sand, is that
Correct.
correct? Okay, but once the casting is made, you then send it to a machinist.
Usually, yes.
And those, he has specific requirements and specifications. He has to machine that down. And we're losing those too. So we're actually not only losing because of these regulations that are forcing businesses out of business, our national defense comes at risk, correct?
That's correct.
Very good.
And those are not businesses that you can just start up in 30 or 60 days.
Right. It's a lot of money to invest in a foundry.
Not to mention permitting.
Not to mention,
Permitting, back to regulations again.
okay, the uncertainty associated with Obamacare is a concern for many people across the country. What are you hearing from your employees and members of your business community? Can we start one at a time? Mr. Fisher, would you like to begin?
I'd be more than happy to, Congressman. The Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, has been a detriment. In our industry, we are in the process of conducting a statewide survey on that very issue, and in fact, most of our member companies have responded that it is having a negative effect, not only on their companies, but I think it's important to remember that there is a trickle-down effect, if you will. So in the construction industry, we build for clients. And when asked has Obamacare affected your clients, nearly 100% of our membership have responded, yes, it is affecting their client base. And so that therefore by affecting their client base, it means that those companies are maybe not able to expand as they would like, but it also then means our companies in the construction industry are likewise not able to access some work opportunities. And it's all because, again, of federal regulations. And so we are seeing it, and I think it's important to remember that it affects more than just what's at the surface, and that there is this domino effect as well. That Obamacare, as well as any other regulation that it has.
Thank you.
Cabot.
Got it, thank you.
So far, we have not had a direct result or direct impact from Obamacare. However, I expect one in a few years in the price of our medical insurance. We provide very good insurance for all of our employees. We pay 90%, they pay 10%, and our rates so far have not gone up. However, I don't believe that the mandate has been in effect long enough for it to really affect our rates. Now, in the next 2 to 3 years, I expect our rates to go up dramatically, and that will seriously impact our operating costs. But how much, it's anybody's guess at this point.
Certainty again.
Yeah.
Mr. Lenahan?
Over the last 4 years, the cost to cover an employee and his family or her family, $800 per month to $1,777 per month. And that's with a reduction on the copay for pharmacy from $20 to $40 per prescription. So substantial increase. And that impacts our ability to hire people.
And personally, as a small volume company, we subcontract the majority of our work, and so I don't have as profound effect personally. However, speaking with some of our suppliers and subcontractors that have direct employees, we're seeing similar feedback to what the fellow people have testified to, that either they're increasing their deductible amount, which is a burden on the employee, or they're taking additional costs on prescription side.
Can we talk a little bit about the uncertainty? A lot of people don't seem to understand it. When I talk to my constituents, they're not, they may be employed, but for a business owner, we often are asked to provide a business plan, and those business plans require forecasting for the next 3 years, right? Am I correct? Mm-hmm. In a business plan. So how does that uncertainty affect your business plan for the next 3 years? And when it comes to these regulations, as well as some of the additional burdens placed on businesses, both small and large, that uncertainty, how does that really affect you? Can you talk a little bit about that uncertainty?
On mine personally, I look at our positioning of land acquisition, commencement of inventory homes if we don't have a custom buyer at that time, and without a clear path, looking forward, or at least some sense of improvement and continuity and not restrictive burdens and greater impact to costs, it's difficult to make those investments. It's a high risk, highly leveraged business and high exposure, and without the ability to comfortably forecast returns, and to make hiring decisions, to generate job opportunities for all of the suppliers and subcontractors that impact housing, uncertainty is a huge weight.
Do you build spec homes primarily, or?
We do.
So you build them in a subdivision, you build maybe 2 or 3 models?
That was prior to the downturn. We were more geared as a subdivision builder. We'd buy large groups of lots, put up a model and several inventory. We've gone through our inventory in the subdivisions. We're now kind of acquiring vacant land or tear downs on as-come basis, because our market was so devastated, there weren't new developments being put in, and as we kind of bled out the existing inventory, now we're in a little bit of a holding pattern, which again negatively impacts the current supply-demand curve.
So, and you build for a specific price point, right?
A range, but yes, it tends to be more the upper end for our company personally.
And if I understood you correctly, you said $2,500 for
For a $121,000 home.
It adds $2,500, which is, let's see, that's quite a bit of a down payment.
Mm-hmm. It is.
For somebody. Yeah. Very good. Let's see here. Mr. Fisher, you mentioned the NLRB's ambush election rule. Are you aware of any other instance where a federal regulation requires a company to provide private information about employees to a separate private organization?
No, and I thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing that up. For brevity's sake, I didn't highlight that aspect. Indeed, this requires, the NLRB is requiring employers to hand over personal information about their workforce and their workers. This includes emails, other type of contact information, and doesn't necessarily have to be a company email, even a private email. And so and one has to question, why is this even being promoted? Well, it's clear that the federal government is doing this because there's entities out there that want employee information for any number of purposes. In this case, probably to try to contact those employees, to try to encourage them to make a decision one way or the other when it comes to labor organizing. It's very rare, it's unprecedented, and I would also add that not only are they doing this, the federal government, or the NLRB, has yet to even provide a justification as to why this proposed rule is being proposed, which brings up significant concerns about proper promulgation of any rule at the federal level.
So if I understand this, you just said that the federal government is requiring you to turn over private emails, employee information, right?
Yes, sir.
We can't get that from them on some other...
Without a justification as to why it's being proposed.
Say that again?
Without providing a justification as to why this proposal even exists in the first place.
Can get her attention, I wonder.
Seems to be a problem. The government can get from us all the information about our lives, but we can't get simple emails on other issues that this committee is dealing with.
Take this.
Can we talk about what role do acquisition, land development, and home construction loans have in the home building industry? Can you elaborate a little more on that, Mr. Kligman?
Absolutely. So from personal example, our company used to have a revolving line of credit with several different lending institutions, and as we either finance for our buyers or built inventory homes, we would cycle through and create productivity. That has effectively gone away. That leaves the option of either, if you have the ability to finance out of pocket to produce and create jobs and work and opportunity, great, but the majority of the builders don't, and therefore they're forced to either be forced out of the game or look at alternative lending solutions, private investors, and effectively you are paying premiums, higher points, higher interest rates, and effectively acquiring a partner in the project where margins are already compressed, and it creates greater challenge and higher risk.
I remember some time ago in that business that I actually teaching school, we had asked my students to go out and do some research on all the various departments that a builder has to associate with or come in contact with, right? Before they even begin building a home. And you might help me out here. Not only do you have to get to secure a building permit, you have to get a land use permit, correct?
That's
In
right.
some communities, they want to know the R factor of windows.
That's energy
wall?
calculations, soil erosion permitting. There's
Okay.
quite a variety.
And so if you put a 2x4 exterior wall, you put 4 inches of insulation, the R value is what? 11, I think?
Correct.
R11. So, and that's been like that for how long?
I'm third generation builder, so as long as I've been involved, I can't speak to it.
As long as I remember too, right? And if you go 2x6, it's what, R19?
You can increase the R value depending.
So here we have something that we've been doing traditionally, or builders have been doing traditionally for 3 generations of builders, and the government now wants you to fill out a form, and they're a couple pages long, if I'm not mistaken.
There, and they've limited the options of creating the same net result by using alternative methods, increasing your efficiency of your furnaces, if, the window R values, so different efficiency products that you can selectively choose. There are companies that are trying to legislate their products into the industry and force change so that it benefits their company, which is, again, creates a burden on the consumer and forces people out of housing opportunities.
And it also, the home buyer could buy a less expensive home if they didn't have to buy all this
Correct.
energy efficient, and over a period of time, if they want to improve the efficiency of their home and as their finances permit, they can improve their situation, correct?
Correct. And with the current code having a 13-year payback, that's quite a bit longer than the average consumer is going to stay in their home and ever see the value of that.
And can you talk about some other some of the other paperwork? If, I know it was about this thick of pile, and a lot of different agencies, right?
Yes, and the different municipalities will have subcontracted out to agencies just to manage that, which again drives up permitting costs. And Mr. Lenahan, had communicated earlier, sometimes the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand in government. We see that in our governmental agencies just to process a permit, where there's no accountability for coordination of the different agencies that are managing that process, and the length of time to process is extended, which impacts cost and increases uncertainty as well.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, do you have some more questions?
Thank you. Let me go to Mr. Klingman again. The lead renovation repair painting rule, EPA has issued a requirement on a certified, EPA renovator, and that work must be conducted by EPA certified firm. Now, that probably is well intended, and any renovations to a house built before 1978 must comply. I'm told that the practical implications are quite different, because biggest percentage of folks are not using qualified individuals. What's happening as a result of that rule from your experience?
Sure. And that's a great question. So the majority of the homes constructed before 1978, approximately over 38 million, 88% of those homes do not have the targeted at-risk group that this rule was written for, which are pregnant women and with children under 6. So the purpose of that rule was to protect that group. The majority of the homes prior to that time do not have that, and the EPA removed the opt-out ability for a homeowner to say, I'm not in this target group, I don't feel I'm at undue risk, and I choose to forego the expense and costs associated with going through this process. And what effectively happens is, if I provide a proposal and I'm following the regulations, there's a cost impact to that that's significant, not only in dollars but in time as well, to manage that. And there are people that aren't as committed to that, or the homeowners will choose to pull their own permits and try and do it themselves, or circumvent the regulation, or they'll pull their own permit and then try and bring in a contractor on the back end, and it penalizes the companies that are trying to accommodate a rule that doesn't really add value to the consumer.
So I've got some information that a survey conducted by the National Association of Remodeling Industry shows that 77% of the homeowners are avoiding the rule by either doing the work on their own or hiring non-certified contractor, fly-by-night operators, or underground contractors. So that's pretty much the case?
I believe it is.
The practical effects of some of these rules and regulations don't have the results they intended, it appears. Regarding the OSHA silica proposed rule, there's several of you that have spoken to this. Any suggestions for OSHA on how to improve the rulemaking process? I guess Mr. Lenahan is just contact people that may be affected.
I'd be glad to comment on that. I think forming alliances is a great idea with industry and the regulatory folks. We've had alliances in the past that have produced good results. Not an OSHA example, but a US EPA example. The US EPA eliminated a sector strategies program several years back, where industry and agency could get together and talk about, hey, this is a rule that's going to kill us, and here's why it's going to kill us. And there were people from the agency that would actually sit down, they'd come out to your facilities, they'd take a look at what you were doing, they'd gain an understanding, and then they'd take that back to DC and explain, this is why this is bad. And I think it did a couple of things. I think it helped transfer information that was good, but it also let the folks in the agency know that we weren't the bad guys. And then we saw them the other way also. And what we have now is really much more of a command and control relationship with OSHA and EPA. And I think we need to get back to where we actually are working together. None of us here, employers, want to do anything other than protect our workers. They're our most valuable asset. They're our friends, they're our neighbors, they're our community members. We want them all to go home every day. We want them to, lead good lives. And it's irritating or frustrating when you feel that people don't understand that.
Anyone else want to comment? Mr. Fisher?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would just add that one thing that we have seen that is frustrating is that there's not always a demonstration of need that's fully articulated or even fully researched. There needs to be a demonstration of need. Whenever OSHA promulgates a rule, its decision-making process, the decision-making process needs to be fact-based and science-based. It can't simply be based on picking winners or losers because of a group that you may want to support for something, again, that's not germane to employee health or safety. There are regulations in which there could be special interest that profits or something like that. And we need to make sure we avoid that. And then I would just add, and it was just hinted upon, is again having that cooperative approach, working together as opposed to a sometimes hostile approach. In other words, the carrot versus the stick, we think seems to work very well because you have then all stakeholders who are at the table that can really work together for the benefit of that core purpose of OSHA, which is health and safety, fact-based, science-based.
Ms. Cabot?
I would just like to add, I agree with both gentlemen. It would be nice to see more individualized effort by OSHA for every industry, instead of just making a sweeping pronouncement saying everybody's got to cut their exposure by half, to look at each industry and say, okay, what do we need to do here that really will improve things? And that kind of cooperative effort, I think, would be very well received by business in general.
Very good. At the conclusion here, I will first yield to Mr. Bentivolio, see if he has any final questions or statement, and also to our witnesses, if there's anything that we haven't questioned you on or that you'd like to bring up before this part of the hearing. Mr. Bentivolio, did you add any other questions or comments?
Mr. Fisher, you mentioned that OSHA allows union representatives to accompany OSHA inspectors on work sites. How do business owners feel about this relationship between government agency and unions?
Well, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In February of 2013, an interpretation letter by OSHA stated that for enforcement actions that now a union representative or a community organizer could come onto the job site of a company that's potentially subject to unionization to participate in that walkthrough, in that inspection, or even in job site sanctions. And if you have a union organizer that's attempting to infiltrate a company and interfere with employee relationship, it draws a distinct and definite concern about what the actual intentions of that person accompanying the OSHA inspector are. And it can certainly be disruptive, and there's no need for it. OSHA, since the 1970s, has never done this, and suddenly there's this rule of interpretation and that allows for this unprecedented interference, and again, the actual intentions do come into question when this occurs.
Intimidation and regulations that sometimes make no sense, thousands of jobs lost, homes priced out of the market for some or beyond the reach of some people because of some regulations that are or additional paperwork to comply with regulations that we as builders have been doing for 3 generations. I don't understand why people, when they see a 2x4 wall, they should be asking, like, what's the insulation in the walls, right? But they don't see that, do they?
They don't.
And and you have to go through, let's see, if you have a wetland in the back of your, even if it's temporary during construction, you have to put up a erosion fence.
There's silt protection and soil erosion, fence protection requirements for, depending on woodlands and wetlands, and sometimes it has to be delineated because, again, for short periods of time, it may not be defined as a wetland, but an inspector will say, I want, you to hire an expert and prove it, so.
Do you know all the regulations for home building?
No, I don't.
So do you have any idea how many regulations there are for home building?
I can't speak to that. One of our members is very active in the codes, but he's brought in, the code book that used to be used and the stack that's used now, and I'll speak from my perspective as a professional. Unless that were your full-time focus to just study the codes as opposed to being a business person and creating job opportunities and providing services to consumers, and we have a long tradition of very happy homeowners, it's impossible.
And for the record, when he said what the regulations used to be, he held his thumb and...
He actually had an old code book, but yeah, it was... Yeah.
Maybe 3/8 thick?
Right.
3/8 of an inch away to stack, and I
It's-
think you signified by about 1.5 feet
It's
high,
significant.
right? Yeah, welcome to this administration. And I think that's it. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for coming today and offering your testimony.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Bentivolio, for inviting us to Plymouth, Michigan, and for the opportunity to conduct this hearing and hear from these witnesses. I had one sort of general last question for all of you. In 2013, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, Office of the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, they released a draft report discussing the benefits and costs of federal regulations. And they found in part that burdensome regulations can impose significant costs on business. In the report, it stated, and let me quote from it, if they are not carefully designed, regulations can also impose significant costs on businesses, potentially dampening economic competition and capital investment. And that release and that statement said what it just said. I'd like to ask you, do you feel that this administration has pursued and adopted regulations that are carefully designed, or do you feel that they harm the economic competition and capital investment? We'll go right down the pike, Miss. Just for the record.
I'll take a stab at that, Mr. Chair, and I don't think that they've been carefully designed. In particular, when a federal agency is in the process of promulgating a rule without providing justification for that rule, there is no, there is absolutely no room for that, and it is burdensome. You stated that at your opening comments, the EPA regulations have a $50 billion with a B dollar price tag just for EPA alone. To put that into perspective, that is more than the entire operating budget of the state of Michigan. And that is $50 billion worth of economic activity, $50 billion worth of potential growth and job creation that is not otherwise being put into the economy. So there is a price tag, and it can be detrimental, and we do have to be absolutely careful and deliberate about what we do to make sure that regulations are sensible and needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Again, a general question, Ms. Cabot.
I listen often to politicians say we need to get more manufacturing jobs. However, all the regulations that I've had to comply with since I became president in 2005 are all designed to put me out of business. The regulations don't want you to manufacture. Nobody wants you near them. I'm not sure, well, obviously I have to believe what I have to comply with, but yeah, I would say that the policies...
You said 2005, so that transcends...
2005, sorry.
Well, that transcends several administrations. Has it gotten better or worse?
It's gotten worse. It's definitely gotten worse. Well, they've gotten a lot more expensive to comply with. There were many early on that were just a matter, and for us, we don't have nearly the paperwork as you have with building a house, because we don't add on very often. It's too expensive and we can't afford it. But there were more regulations, but they weren't as damaging.
And didn't potentially put you out of business.
Right.
Mr. Lenahan. I think it just goes on.
More time here. There we
you
go. Sorry. I would say look at the data, and the data shows that 4 of the top 5 years for regulation generation have happened under the Obama administration. Number 5, I think, or one of the 5 is under the Bush administration.
Seem to be coming out
The
day and night.
data would reflect that.
Yeah. Mr. Kling.
I echo the sentiments, and it does seem that there's a disconnect between the promulgation of some of these rules and the practical, application in nature and the impact, and detriment to job growth and economy and opportunity.
Well, I want to thank all of our 4 witnesses. Again, Mr. Bentivolio, he's a great breath of fresh air in Congress. He comes from a business background. I'm not an attorney. Actually, I was a developer. I had to, in the days I did projects, I could go into City Hall in the morning, get the permit in the afternoon. Now, I think the last project I was involved in, it took 6 months to do the permitting, and it just went on and on. And it's gotten pretty tough to do business, stay in business. And then the practical application, you see the well-intended regs, but then the consequences that people find a way to avoid that cost and maybe endanger themselves, or maybe endangering more people the way we're doing this. It's interesting, too, to see that nobody seems like they're trying to avoid compliance. It's just a matter of a cooperative and directed effort, and something that can be built on common sense, and also looking at the final results, which is so important that you want to achieve. Particularly, I'll use Mr. Lenahan's the Foundry quote in many future speeches when he testified today, that we've gone from 5,000 to 1,900, and many of those jobs and activity, employment, economic opportunities sent beyond our shores. That is very sobering, and I was way underestimate. You said 350,000 jobs. That's serious impact. I saw the jobs report this past week, and we went down in numbers to 6.3, but then I saw almost 1 million people left the workforce. We'll have fewer people actually working than we've had in 25 years, something like that, and a phenomenal decrease, which makes us less competitive, less skilled workforce, and many people becoming more reliant on the government, either in retirement and then some of the things that have passed that have encouraged part-time rather than full employment. And people are struggling now with 2, 3 jobs, or not sure of their employment. If the brick factory goes down, that's 80 people in a century of conducting honest, productive business. Very, very sad. As I drove in, I saw a lot of vacant properties, which is maybe back to do another hearing on those. But you become concerned when you see the decline in good-paying jobs, employment, expansion of businesses. Too many of them boarded up or closed down. I've learned some things here. Hopefully we can take back. Mr. Bentivolio on the Small Business Committee, which is so important to this community, the state, and the country, and trying to keep those folks in business employing people and expanding. But again, very informative, a fairly brief hearing, but we'll make this part of the record. If there is additional information that we will submit either from witnesses, we may have additional questions we will submit to you, or additional information. And if you have constituents and others that want to submit things without objection, the record will be kept open for a period of 7 legislative days. There being no further business before the Subcommittee on Government Operations, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.